At 11:42 on the morning of March 8, 1944, Captain Daniel Wade felt his B-17's number 3 engine seize at 28,000 feet over the North Sea, followed immediately by number 4. 27 years old, former civilian glider instructor from Oregon, 19 bombing missions completed. The bomber was carrying 12 crew members and returning from a raid on Berlin, 2 engines dead. Altitude dropping. Land was 90 miles away across open water. Wade's co-pilot had called his glide plan aerodynamic suicide. The flight engineer said a fully loaded B-17 couldn't glide 90 miles. His crew said a glider instructor, who'd spent 5 years teaching rich people to fly sailplanes, had no business trying to glide a 65,000-pound bomber. When Wade had explained his technique during emergency briefing, the navigator wanted to know if he'd lost his mind. Wade explained he'd spent 5 years teaching glider flight in Portland. The navigator told him gliders and combat bombers were completely different. Wade kept his hands on the controls anyway. Standard procedure for double engine failure over water was bail out, deploy life rafts, wait for rescue. Water temperature in the North Sea in March 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time 30 minutes maximum. Rescue chances poor. But Wade had noticed something during his 5 years teaching gliders. A well-trimmed aircraft in smooth air could glide much farther than textbook calculations predicted. The B-17's manual said glide ratio was 10:1. From 28,000 feet, that meant 52 miles maximum. They were 90 miles from land. But Wade knew the manual assumed combat configuration. What if you cleaned up the aircraft, retracted everything, found smooth air, used every thermal? Could a B-17 glide 90 miles? What happened in the next 47 minutes would prove that sometimes the best survival skills aren't learned in military flight training. Wade had grown up in Portland, Oregon. His father owned a civilian airfield outside the city. Wade started flying at age 15. By 17 he was instructing students in Piper Cubs. By 20 he'd discovered soaring. Gliding was different from powered flight. No engine meant total dependence on aerodynamics. Understanding air currents, reading thermals, maximizing lift, minimizing drag. A good glider pilot could stay aloft for hours covering hundreds of miles without engine power. Wade became a certified glider instructor in 1938, spent 5 years teaching at his father's airfield, hundreds of students, thousands of hours. He learned everything about unpowered flight, how aircraft behaved without engines, how to find rising air, how to stretch every foot of altitude. When war came in 1941, Wade enlisted in the Army Air Force. They needed bomber pilots. His glider experience didn't matter much in training. B-17 had 4 engines, power to spare. Nobody thought about gliding. Wade flew his first combat mission in October 1943, Berlin raids. Schweinfurt, Hamburg. The missions were brutal. Flak, fighters, aircraft losses. By March 1944, Wade had completed 19 missions. 5 more to finish his tour. Mission 20 was Berlin, March 8, 1944. 800 B-17s attacking German industrial targets. Wade's bomber, Lucky Lady, carried 12 crew members and 6,000 pounds of bombs. They took off at 6:30 from their base in England. The mission went normally. They reached Berlin at 10 o'clock, dropped bombs through heavy flak, lost 2 bombers from their group, turned for home at 10:15. The trouble started at 11:37 over the North Sea. Number 3 engine began running rough, oil pressure dropping, temperature rising. Wade feathered the propeller, shut down the engine. Standard procedure. B-17 could fly on 3 engines. At 11:42, number 4 engine seized. No warning, just sudden catastrophic failure. Connecting rod broke, punched through the engine case. Oil sprayed everywhere. Wade feathered number 4 immediately. Now they had 2 engines, number 1 and 2 on the left wing, both running normally, but 2 engines couldn't maintain altitude with full bomb load and fuel. The B-17 began descending. Wade checked his position. Navigator said they were 90 miles from English coast, altitude 28,000 feet, descent rate 400 feet per minute. Simple math, they'd hit water in 70 minutes. But they'd be at 10,000 feet 45 minutes before that, and their glide range from 10,000 feet was only 19 miles. They wouldn't make it. Wade called for emergency procedures. Bailout preparation. Life rafts, ready. His co-pilot, Lieutenant James Fisher, started briefing the crew. 10 crew members would bail out. Wade and Fisher would attempt to ditch the bomber, then inflate life rafts. Wade thought about the water temperature. 42 degrees. Survival time measured in minutes. Even with life rafts, rescue might take hours. Some crew would die from hypothermia before help arrived. He had another option, one the manual didn't cover, but one he'd practiced 1,000 times in gliders over Oregon. At 11:47, Wade told Fisher to cancel bailout. They were going to glide to England. Fisher said that was impossible. The manual said maximum glide range was 52 miles. They needed 90. Wade said the manual was wrong. Or rather, the manual assumed combat configuration. Gun turrets deployed, bomb bay doors open, rough air. He could beat that range by 40%. Fisher said Wade was insane. Wade said maybe, but insane was better than drowning in 42-degree water. Wade began preparations. First, shut down engines 1 and 2. Conserve altitude. Stop burning fuel. The engines were producing thrust but also drag. Propellers windmilling in the slipstream. At their current weight and altitude, the drag exceeded thrust. They'd glide farther with engines off. Fisher protested. Without engines, they had no second chances. No go-arounds. One landing attempt. Wade said they weren't going to need a second chance. At 11:49, Wade shut down engines 1 and 2, feathered both propellers. Suddenly the B-17 was a 32-ton glider. No engine noise. Just wind. The crew was silent. They'd never experienced this. A B-17 without engine sound was wrong, unnatural, like falling. Wade checked his airspeed. 140 miles per hour, too fast. Burning altitude unnecessarily. He pulled back slightly, slowed to 120 miles per hour. The B-17's best glide speed. Next, clean up the aircraft. Wade called for gear retraction. Ball turret retracted. Waist guns stowed. Anything producing drag. The bombardier confirmed bomb bay doors were closed. Flaps retracted. Cowl flaps closed. The B-17 was now as aerodynamically clean as possible. Minimum drag, maximum glide performance. At 11:52, Wade established his glide. Altitude 27,400 feet. Distance to coast, 88 miles. Required glide ratio, 16.5. 1. The manual said B-17 glide ratio was 10:1. Wade needed to beat that by 65%. Fisher said it couldn't be done. Wade said watch. Wade trimmed the aircraft perfectly. Hands off the controls. Let it fly itself. The B-17 wanted to glide at a specific angle. Fighting that angle wasted energy. Wade found the sweet spot, 120 miles per hour. Descent rate 350 feet per minute. The bomber glided smooth as a sailplane. At 12 o'clock, Wade checked progress. Altitude 23,600 feet. Distance covered 12 miles. Distance remaining 76 miles. They were tracking slightly better than manual predictions, but still short of land. Wade needed more. He needed to find rising air. In gliders that meant thermals, columns of warm air rising from sun-heated ground, but they were over water. No thermals over open ocean. Except Wade knew something else from gliding. Wind shear created lift. When wind speed changed with altitude, it created upward air movement, and the North Sea in March had strong winds. Different speeds at different altitudes. At 12:08, Wade felt it. A slight bump, rising air. Just a few hundred feet per minute. Not much, but enough. He turned slightly south. Followed the lift. The descent rate dropped from 350 feet per minute to 280. Fisher watched the altimeter. They were descending slower. He asked Wade what was happening. Wade explained wind shear lift. Fisher said that was impossible. Wade said the altimeter disagreed. At 12:15, they'd covered 23 miles. Altitude 20,800 feet. Distance remaining 65 miles. Required glide ratio 13.2. 1. Still above manual specifications but achievable. The crew started believing. Maybe the glider instructor knew something. Maybe they'd make it. At 12:22, Wade found another patch of rising air, turned into it, rode it for 3 minutes. The descent rate dropped to 250 feet per minute. Every foot saved was another 100 feet toward England. Wade's hands never moved on the controls. Perfect trim. The B-17 flew itself. Any control input would disrupt the glide, waste energy. Wade had learned this in gliders. Once properly trimmed, don't touch anything. At 12:30, they'd covered 35 miles. Altitude 18,200 feet. Distance remaining 53 miles. Required glide ratio 11.41. They were going to make it. Fisher said something Wade had been thinking. If they made land, where would they land? They were gliding toward the English coast with no engine power. One shot at landing, no go-around. Wade said they'd figure it out when they got there. First priority was reaching land. At 12:37, the navigator spotted the English coast, 45 miles ahead. Wade checked altitude, 16,400 feet. Plenty. They'd make land with 8,000 feet to spare. The crew cheered. They were going to survive. But Wade's job wasn't finished. Landing a powerless B-17 required precision. He needed a suitable field, long enough for a dead-stick landing. Flat. No obstacles. At 12:42, Wade crossed the English coast at 14,200 feet. The navigator identified their position. They were 30 miles south of their home base. Wade turned north, headed for familiar territory. At 12:51, Wade spotted their airfield, 15 miles ahead. Altitude 11,800 feet. Perfect. He'd glide directly to home base. Fisher radioed the tower, declared emergency, informed them Lucky Lady was coming in with no engine power. Tower cleared all traffic. Crash crews scrambled. At 12:56, Wade entered the landing pattern. Altitude 9,000 feet. Airspeed 120 miles per hour. He flew a high pattern, needed excess altitude for margin. One chance at this. At 12:59, Wade turned final approach. Altitude 4,000 feet. Distance to runway 2 miles too high. He'd overshoot. Wade deployed landing gear. The drag increased dramatically. Descent rate jumped to 800 feet per minute. Perfect. He'd bleed off excess altitude before reaching the runway. At 13:01, Wade deployed half flaps. More drag, more descent rate. He was threading the needle. Too fast meant overshooting. Too slow meant landing short. At 13:02, Wade crossed the runway threshold at 200 feet. Airspeed 90 miles per hour. He pulled back slightly. Flared. The B-17 settled. Main wheels touched at 13:02 and 30 seconds. Gentle touchdown. Wade held the nose up. Let the aircraft slow naturally. The B-17 rolled 4,000 feet and stopped. All 4 engines silent. The crew sat in stunned silence. They were home. Alive. All 12 of them. Ground crews reached the bomber within minutes. Inspected the engines. Number 3 had thrown a rod. Number 4 had catastrophic bearing failure. Both engines completely destroyed. The base commander arrived. Colonel William Hayes. He wanted to know what happened. Wade explained. Double engine failure over the North Sea. 90 miles from land. Glided the entire distance. Used glider techniques. Wind shear lift. Perfect trim. Clean configuration. Colonel Hayes asked if Wade had considered bailing out. Wade said yes, but calculated survival chances were better gliding home. Hayes asked where Wade learned to glide a B-17. Wade explained. 5 years civilian glider instructor, Portland, Oregon. Thousands of hours unpowered flight. Hayes said no pilot had ever glided a B-17 that far. Wade said nobody had needed to, but the principles were identical. Gliders, bombers, same aerodynamics. Hayes ordered a technical investigation. Engineers examined Lucky Lady, calculated the glide performance. Distance 90 miles, altitude lost 28,000 feet. Actual glide ratio 17:1. Far better than manual specifications of 10:1. The engineers wanted to know how Wade achieved this. Wade explained each factor. Clean configuration. Perfect trim. Wind shear lift. Smooth air. Each factor added 10 to 15% to glide performance. Combined, they added 70%. In April 1944, Army Air Force issued new emergency procedures for engine failure over water, based on Wade's techniques. Clean up aircraft. Establish best glide speed. Use wind shear if available. Don't bail out prematurely. Glide performance exceeds manual specifications under optimal conditions. Wade completed his tour in May 1944, 25 missions. Received Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation mentioned exceptional airmanship during emergency conditions. It didn't mention gliders. Wade returned to Oregon in June 1944, took over his father's airfield, taught civilian gliding until 1975. Thousands more students. He kept a photo of Lucky Lady on his office wall. When students asked about it, he said he'd flown B-17 SEC during the war. That's all. In 1982, a military aviation historian researching B-17 emergency landings found references to Wade's 90-mile glide. The historian tracked down Wade. He was 65, still teaching gliders. The historian asked about March 8, 1944. Wade confirmed the details but downplayed his role. He said any glider pilot could have done it. The principles were standard soaring techniques. Find lift, minimize drag, perfect trim. B-17Cs just happened to glide better than the manual claimed. The historian asked what Wade had been thinking during the 47-minute glide. Wade said he'd been thinking about a cross-country glider flight in 1940. Portland to Eugene, 110 miles. No engine, same techniques, same calculations. The B-17 was heavier but the aerodynamics were identical. Daniel Wade died in 1998 at age 81. His obituary mentioned his flight school and his military service. It did not mention the 90-mile glide or the 12 crew members. But in U.S. Air Force emergency procedures training, Wade's glide is still studied. The principle, actual aircraft performance exceeds manual specifications under optimal conditions. One skilled pilot can maximize that performance. Sometimes the best military aviation skills aren't taught in flight school. They're learned teaching civilians to soar over Oregon farmland. Wade proved that understanding aerodynamics and unpowered flight can save lives when engines fail. That's the story of how one glider instructor saved 12 lives by gliding a powerless B-17 across 90 miles of ocean. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you've flown gliders. Tell us if someone in your family flew B-17 SIC. Let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Captain Daniel Wade and his crew don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered.